virus gets a chance to replicate once it's in there. But let's now, so let's say a week has passed, roughly plus or minus. We have some virus, because unfortunately the coronavirus is pretty strong. So we have some virus in our cells. It's replicating at a level more or less. The body's trying to fight it. And then after about 7 days, our T cells, our other immune system, the adaptive immune system, comes into play. And that's where it decides, in a very simplified version, whether we will fight it properly and get rid of it, or whether we might go into that very dangerous cytokine storm and inflammasome stage, where we saw all the related problems that could come with that. Yes, so finally I have the slide that I wanted before. So here, Th1 versus Th17. And this is very simplified. There are a lot of other factors involved, but the most important thing is to know that it is a continuum, so it's not just one or the other, but if one is stronger, it kind of shuts off the other, and if that one's stronger, it shuts off the other one. So it's quite important to be aware that if we strengthen one, at the same time it also decreases the other, and the other way around. Now, so if we turn on the Th1 system, as you can see here, Th1 cells, they release some cytokine called IFN gamma. You don't have to remember that, but that then leads into intracellular killing. That is what we want. We want to kill the cell. We want to kill the virus in the cells. Now, if we have the Th17 that is on here on the other side, it recruits a different cytokine called IL-17, and that actually recruits other inflammatory cells. Rather than killing the cell properly, it recruits other inflammation. And that can then, they recruit other ones, other cytokines. So there's this IL-17, and then it recruits NF-kappa B, IL-6, TNF, IL-1 beta. You don't have to remember those. Just remember that if the Th17 cell is more dominant, it will recruit all these cytokines that actually, they're important in small doses, but if they all come together, they all of a sudden don't make the cell die, which is called apoptosis. That's what we want. We want the cells, the immune system, to kill the cell that has the virus and just get rid of it. Now, that is apoptosis. What happens if we have this, all of that sudden, all these cytokines, is that instead of the cell dying and just being disposed, it's something else, this pyroptosis. And you might remember that from the studies before. That's been linked to the lethal cases. We have that more. And that means that the cell kind of dies, but it kind of dissolves. And then all these little particles of the dead cell float around, and the immune system gets irritated and thinks, oh, something's wrong here. We have dead cell. So they recruit even more immune cells and more cytokines. And that then becomes a perpetuating cycle called the NLPR3 Inflammasome Activation and the Cytokine Storm, which could then lead to a potential lethal outcome in the lungs, in the heart, in the arteries, or for wherever it goes, wherever it lodges the most. But it's a systemic inflammation. And that's because if the Th17 system is more dominant. On the other side, again, we have the Th1 system. If we release mainly that IFN gamma, it's a very antiviral cytokine, and that predisposes the body to do its thing, kill the cell with the virus, apoptosis, and get rid of the cell death, suppresses the virus, and then you recover and are potentially immune. That is still to be discussed. Whether we get immunity, we won't go into that today. We'll just go into the things we can actually influence. And that is whether our body shifts more towards a Th1 response, which is important to kill off the virus and get rid of it, or whether our body switches more towards the Th17 response, which leads to that whole cycle of cell death, parts of the dead cells starting to float around, recruiting more cytokines, more of these immune cells and chemicals, and they just overtake and lead to that inflammation in the whole body because the body thinks it's completely overwhelmed, and that can then cause to the lethal and damaging symptoms. Okay, so we talked about that before. We don't have to or just quickly here again, inflammasome activation triggers blood clotting and host death through pyroptosis, as found in Cell magazine, or multi-organ failure induced by viral upregulation of inflammatory processes and cytokine release in Science Direct. And the last one, these molecules are pro-inflammatory molecules that form an entity called inflammasome, of which the most well-studied is the NLPR3 inflammasome. And that has been linked to many other chronic health conditions, including gout, rheumatoid arthritis, autoimmune conditions, and cancers. So now we're getting to more to what that means. Why do some people express the Th1 and other people the Th17 system more? So there is a genetic involvement, whether you are more prone towards the good cytokines or the bad cytokines, whether your body is easier to trigger the right kind of immune response or the right kind of molecules. But there's also something called epigenetics, which the ones that have been working with me probably know, but I'll just repeat it again. So let's say we have twins at birth. They're being divided into two different families. One is a very nurturing, healthy, happy, loving family. They're exercising, they're eating well, they're sleeping, they're getting sunshine. And the other one, unfortunately, is not as lucky and gets put into maybe a family that is a little bit less fortunate. They're not getting the right food. Maybe there's smoking, maybe there's abuse, maybe there's other unhealthy lifestyle factors. And then they look at them at a certain age, and they can see that even though those twins have the exact same genes, their expression of how they actually are, their health status is completely different. And that's called epigenetics. That is what influences our genetic expression. That's our environment. It's what nutrients we take, what our heavy metal exposure, our toxin exposure, our stress levels, if we have enough love in our life. All these things can actually trigger certain genes to be turned on and off, even though we have twins, for example, have the same genes. So there are genetic predispositions to some of these, whether we're turning on the Th1 or the Th17, but we're not doomed by them. We can influence them, because if we do the right things, we can always work on the epigenetics and really fine tune whether the body actually turns on the bad gene or turns it off. So here's just a quick science correlation of IL-17 and NF-kappa B. Those are two of the bad cytokines that can trigger that whole cytokine storm. Gene polymorphisms with susceptibility and prognosis in acute respiratory distress syndrome in a Chinese population. That's just one of the studies, but there's many studies linking different genes, polymorphisms meaning slight mutations in the gene, to whether you're more susceptible to one thing or the other. But then epigenetics is what we're focusing on today, so things that we can actually influence. Okay, so what are the factors that make us shift more towards the Th1, the viral killing, or the Th17 with the NLRP3 and that cytokine storm, that potentially dangerous mechanism? What are they? What shift that scale from side to side? So on the left side, we have the Th1 system gets triggered and activated by things like sirtuins. You might have never heard of them, but there are certain molecules in the body. They deactivate the Th17 system directly. They lower inflammation, which again directly deactivates that inflammation and over-inflammation of the body. It supports the Th1 defense and the system. Now, how do we trigger the sirtuins? They get triggered by eating things like nuts and olives and avocados, because they have certain fatty acids in them that directly trigger and strengthen the sirtuin system. Then intermittent fasting has been shown to trigger that as well. Being in a ketogenic, so in a fat burning stage rather than in a sugar and carb burning stage, has also been shown to trigger those sirtuins. So those are quite easy things to do on a day-to-day to prevent or to strengthen the sirtuins and increase the Th1 response. We'll go through some other things that we can do to improve that in a moment. But also another thing that's important here, vitamin D has been shown to directly reduce NF-kappa B, which is one of the bad molecules that trigger that whole cycle to spin out of control. So if we have enough vitamin D, it doesn't only help our mucosal lining and all those things that the virus doesn't get into the body, but it also, if the virus does get into the body, if we have enough vitamin D, it then also calms down the immune system and says, no, we don't need that bad cell death and all that overinflammation. We can do it the right way. Ketones, what I just mentioned, if you're in a ketogenic metabolism, so you're not having overly abundant carbs inside the body all the time, they have been shown to be very highly anti-inflammatory, again, leading away from that overinflammation, but also directly reduce that NLPR3 inflammasome, all these weird chemicals that cause the big trouble. And then another thing that triggers Th1 and helps us there is fever. So we actually need a fever, and that is another thing that is easily messed with if we take NSAIDs. If we take those over-the-counter painkillers that often reduce our fever, and then we can't actually fight the virus off properly in the first stage. So then it starts to replicate more, and we shift more towards that other stage where the body can't fight it properly. Now, what factors are there that shift towards the Th17 system and that increase our risk for potentially lethal complications? So you might sound like this is a broken record. It sounds like the similar things as there were in the first line of defense, but there are basically the same symptoms or the same underlying causes. So co-infections, like if you have a candida, long-term yeast overgrowth in the body, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, so the bacteria in the wrong part of the gut, and it gives you bloating or it gives you heartburn, or you have other gut imbalances, like not enough of the good guys, if you've been taking antibiotics, for example, or you have mold exposure. All these kind of infections, they have been shown to directly trigger the Th17 response. And that is because they're usually extracellular. They're in hollow organs like the gut, in the urinary tract, and they trigger the Th17 response. So a lot of people, and I see it in a lot of my patients when I test them, they might not know, but they might have a yeast overgrowth, and it's just constantly there, or their gut bacteria are not balanced. They have too much of the bad guys, Clostridia, or not enough of the good ones, or they have some mold exposure. And all these things shift towards the Th17. It doesn't mean that if someone has they will die if they catch it. It just means that shifts more towards it. So we need to try and support the rest so we can deal with it better if we do get exposed. The next thing that has been shown directly to shift that gauge over to Th17 response is autoimmunity. So a lot of people have autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, or Crohn's disease, or Hashimoto's, sometimes even without knowing. And if you have an autoimmune disease, it usually shifts to the Th17 response. Now there's some exceptions that trigger the Th1 as well. But overall, if you are in an autoimmune state that isn't well controlled, then your body will be more towards this Th17, because that is one of the components of autoimmunity. Now, what triggers autoimmunity? There's certain factors, but one of the things, again, is food intolerances. So if your body keeps eating foods that it is intolerant to, for one reason or another, then every time it does that, it triggers the immune system, and it causes that slight autoimmunity where the body says, oh, I'm getting constantly triggered, so now I'm getting tired and I don't know what's good or bad anymore, so I'm going to just fight off everything. And that is what, in a nutshell, then leads to or contributes to autoimmunity, but also to that Th17 system to be triggered. So if people are eating foods they're intolerant to, and that can be, again, it could be healthy foods like almonds or avocados, but it could also be one person might be fine with dairy, the other person might have an intolerance to it. So if they're eating it, they're constantly triggering that Th17 system. Another thing that similar to what we talked about before that directly triggers that Th17 response is chronic stress. Now, if we're stressed, a short-term stressor is good. It kind of spikes up our immune system, it kills everything off, it's anti-inflammatory, and then we're done. But if we're constantly stressed, we're working long hours, or we're being worried about money or finances or emotional stressful relationships, then that starts to, it keeps triggering cortisol, our stress, one of our stress hormones, but then eventually the receptors stop responding to the cortisol. So then it's not anti-inflammatory anymore, but it starts to also reduce our macrophages, which are actually important to kill off the virus. So they then go down. We don't have enough of the good guys anymore. But we have, at the same time, if we have stress and our sympathetic, our fight or flight nervous system goes up, we have too much of the bad guys. So we don't have enough of the good guys, we have too much of the bad guys, and that shifts us to that Th17 response. If we're not training enough or we're overtraining, both of it has been shown to shift to the Th17. So it's important to train, but not to overtrain. Lack of sleep directly has been shown to increase levels of something called IL-6, which is one of the cytokines that we need, but we don't want it too much because it contributes to the cytokine storm. Then another thing, a little bit more complicated maybe here, is the ACE, and I won't go into much detail here because it is complicated, but if people have a genetic mutation here, maybe they're having more of they have more of the blood pressure dysregulation in their body, and that can also shift the body over to the Th17 system. Again, same thing, omega-3s, but they are very anti-inflammatory. So they really shine in this stage. That's why they are so anti-inflammatory, because they have actually components that can resolve that inflammation. So if we already maybe going towards that NLPR3, inflammasome, cytokine storm, if we get enough omega-3s, they've been shown to really potently resolve that inflammation. But if we're taking, so if someone takes a lot of over-the-counter painkillers, NSAIDs, they actually have been shown to have a loss of that resolution. So if we're inflamed, then the body, even though short-term we take the pill, it takes away the inflammation, long-term it leads to a lack of loss there. So the inflammation keeps going. Another thing that upregulates the Th17 is having not enough potassium, such as found in leafy greens and lots of vegetables, and not enough glutathione. And that is, the glutathione is our master antioxidant that is really important to kill off free radical damage, to kill off any kind of damage. And if there's not enough, it leads to inflammation and fibrosis, which is one of the problems that we encounter in the lungs, for example. So people that maybe they're not dying, but we're maybe lingering symptoms in the lungs, there's a slight fibrosis, and that can be due to inadequate glutathione. And also inadequate glutathione lowers our macrophages, which we need to get rid of that inflammasome. Same thing again, zinc deficiency doesn't only help our actual cells not to allow the virus to continue replicating, but it also directly influences that stage of Th17 to Th1. And another direct relation is with glucose. So if we're eating a lot of sugars, it shifts the body towards that cytokine storm. It makes us more inflamed. So I know this is all a lot of details, but we'll get to what you can do about it in a moment. I just want you to understand that all these things are actually things we can influence. Maybe some of them are more of a long-term approach, but if you are living a generally healthy diet or a generally healthy lifestyle, then let's think about it in a bucket. If you're putting some things in there that are prone to Th17, let's say you have some genetics that predispose you, maybe you have some candida, maybe you have lack of sleep, but if you're then making it up with other things, you're keeping that bucket from overflowing. And that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say, I don't want you to get out here and be worried that you have all these things. Just think about, okay, I have a few things I might not be able to influence right now here and there, but I can do all these other things that will take away the load to shift me more towards the Th1. And what they found is that most people that die are on that scale of the Th17 quite far because of a lifestyle of a long-term problem. And even kids that have the Kawasaki disease, those are generally children that already have imbalances in all these things, even though they're only little. Okay, we talked about this. Here, just another little thing. Blood glucose levels correlated tightly with levels of inflammatory cytokines. Okay, so here, this is just, I'm not going into a lot of details here, a lot of more scientific details, but it just shows that if we normally have on the left, the A, we have an infection, then our immune response comes in, it kills it off, and then this is inflammation, and then this is the immune resolution. So it clears it out. It clears the infection, the inflammation clears the infection, and then the resolution gets rid of it. Now, if we have the cytokine storm, the body tries to kill the infection with way too much inflammation and doesn't have enough resolution. And if, on the other hand, so that's seen in some people that are more maybe younger or healthier, but they keep having problems and it keeps coming back, is that they have the infection, the body mounts an immune response here, but it's not high enough because there's not enough Th1. There may be some problems that lead to the Th1 not being strong enough that the infection can't get killed. So they keep having a little bit of that inflammation. So that's people that generally are overall healthy, but they've somehow got it in because they have autoimmune issues, or they're stressed, or they have been drinking too much. And now they keep trying to fight it because the body is somewhat strong, but it's not inadequate because it's not right. It's on the scale. It's not all the way towards the Th1, which they need, but it's also not all the way towards the Th17 to trigger that potentially lethal problem. So it keeps reactivating. They feel a little bit better, and then they go out and drink, or they stay at home and drink, or they over-exercise, and then all of a sudden it tips them back into it. So it keeps being fighting. So I've seen that in a lot of my friends, that keeps happening.
Of course.
Okay, so another thing that I was trying to explain with that bucket before, and here's a better picture called Cogens. It's a great functional immunology institute online where people can study. So if you're interested, go and check it out. They're great. So this just shows that if someone, so we all need to mount an inflammation to kill off the virus or any infection. But if we're already on a very inflamed state, then that spike leads us over the threshold to have problems, to go into overinflammation, to trigger the Th17 response, to get the potentially lethal symptoms. But if our overall bucket is empty or is not that full, then we mount that inflammation down here, and it's fine, and then we just get rid of it again. So that just shows that we can really influence this and shouldn't be too worried. Obviously, there's still factors coming out, and there's things that maybe can't be influenced, and some people that are doing everything right over their lifetime, they still are dying, unfortunately. But there is a lot of studies and data out there that show us that we don't have to, let's say to 90%, I'm just making up this number, we can influence our own response to it if we get exposed. There are obviously always a few things that we can't control, but overall we can. So what do? We won't go through all of them. I can send you this if you like, but this is basically a summary of all the different things that I talked about, what triggers the failure of the different systems. This puts it back into balance. And there are certain supplements that you can help short term to really boost it. And then obviously from a functional medicine perspective, we always like to look at the overall thing. So we try and work on the autoimmunity. We try and work on any co-infections, but those are more long-term things. So right now we have this crisis in the world. So maybe you want to do the things that just as a short-term boost really help the immune system with the different things like high-dose vitamin D, high-dose vitamin C. If you have IV, if you can have access to IV vitamin C or glutathione, all these things we talked about before, they really boosted. Or you can take some different mushrooms, some medicinal mushrooms that really have been shown to increase the immune response and lower that overinflammation. So those are all things you can do right now, here and then, to, if you get exposed, make sure that you're not slipping down the bad road. Or if you feel like you have a lot of things that make you more prone towards the Th17 response, and maybe you really want to focus on some anti-inflammatory substances like curcumin or resveratrol or melatonin. They've all been studied to take the Th17 response down. So they're all quite powerful things that you can do. And then last thing, there's also down here, you have testing. So you could, if you're not sure where you are right now on that whole scale, you could do a few tests and say, okay, where am I right now? How are my vitamin D levels? Do I have to worry about this? How are my omega-3 levels? And then you can put them all into the functional medicine ranges, which are a little bit stricter to see whether you're actually optimal and you can mount a proper immune response or not, or whether you've been shifting towards the potentially more dangerous sides. Okay, here's just a little study in a journal about vitamin D. So it helps our immune response and the Th1 to kill off things, but it also helps the body be more tolerant and not overreact. So vitamin D is quite a powerful substance in this case. Okay, then I just wanted to show you, if you were interested, let me see if that works, if I can open it up. No, login. So I've been creating this, oh, that didn't work. 1 second. I've been creating this platform so people can actually put everything together. So they can look at their genetics, they can upload their 23andMe or their Ancestry.com data connected to this, and then it looks at things from a functional medicine perspective. So here's the COVID-19 profile, and it shows you all your different genes where you have some risks here, and it tells you what you can do to help it. So let's say here, AC2 receptors, it tells you what it is, and then it also shows you what you can do, avoid, and what you can test. So let's say someone genetically is more prone to having a lack of omega-3s in their diet. Here you can see, okay, omega-3, let's see where it is. Omega-3 index, you can click on it. And if it works, yep, here it works. And if you've if you've tested that previously in your blood, you can upload them, and then you can see, oh, back then, when was that? May 2018, I was out of range, but now I'm in the yellow zone, so I'm a lot better, so I don't have to worry so much, but I need a little more to get into the green zone. And so for each of the factors, you can test and you can upload your blood results and just get back to make sure that you are right on track and get everything working perfectly so you don't have to worry. Let me get back to this. Okay, so you can upload your DNA so you can see where the risk factors are. But like I said, actually, I think it's much more important to see where you are right now, because maybe you're doing everything right. Maybe you don't have to worry about anything. And then you can have your own targeted protocol to fine tune and track everything here if that was of interest. Okay, so that was a long presentation, I think. Thank you for listening, and it's your turn. So I'll check whether anyone has sent me any questions. Let me just have a look. Any questions have come in? Okay, none here. I think maybe I'm no questions. So if you have any questions, you can send them now, but I'm checking my emails, my WhatsApp, my Instagram. So no questions. Okay, well, in that case, if you have questions after this or more specific things, you can contact me, and I will try and help. And I'm not very techy, so this is new. This is my first online webinar. I will try and upload this onto YouTube, and then you can look at it back. You can share it if you like, and I'll send you the links by email and WhatsApp. Oh, where is it? You're still there. Okay, perfect. So there I am. It was lovely to have you all, and have a great day. Thank you.